Welcome to the first At Issue program of the 27th season of At Issue. I'm H. Wayne Wilson. Thank you so much for joining us. Instead of telling you what the topic is, let me just introduce the two guests and you'll know what the topic is because it's wide-ranging about City of Peoria issues with the City Manager, Patrick Urich. Thank you for being with us, Patrick.
Thank you for having us.
And the Mayor of the City of Peoria, Mayor Jim Ardis. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks.
Let's not hesitate. Let's get into downtown issues first, if we will, and of course, Warehouse District. Approximately $30 million worth of road infrastructure improvements. A few businesses have taken the step. The Sugar Restaurant and Pat Sullivan is doing some work on the old Seal Test building. But we need some of those big warehouses to fall into place. Do we have any progress in that arena?
Yeah, actually, we're kind of excited that, to our knowledge at least, there's at least two of the big buildings down here that are under contract now. I don't think they've quite closed yet, but they are under contract with pretty interesting projects in both. And you know, we're excited just because what we've seen over the course of our reinvestment in the Warehouse District is a lot of these old warehouses, the same people have owned them for 20 or 30 or 40 years and haven't put a dime into them. Now that there's $30 million of new infrastructure all around them, they're pretty proud of their property, and their asking price is pretty significant. So there's been a time here where the market was trying to determine what the fair cost on those buildings is, or are, if it's plural. And really, these two buildings, I think, are going to establish a bar for value, and I think we'll see a lot more happening because of that.
And that pricing is critical because if the price is too high with some of the other requirements in renovating, including stairwells, elevators, things of that nature.
ADA.
ADA, thank you. It might put them outside of the range of being able to rent or sell.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to look at it as there's the cost of bringing these older buildings into code compliance. And it's, if you're putting residential units in a building, you're going to have to put in an elevator. You're going to have to make sure that it's sprinkled and that there's costs that go along with that. By doing that, you have to make sure that you can do it affordably. The developer needs to make a fair return on their investment, and it has to be within the market range of what our rents are in Peoria, and that's the challenge. So if the asking price is too high, it puts the building underwater, and you're not able to do that.
Is there? Have you seen any plans? What do these investors hope to accomplish?
It's everything that we've been looking for in the Warehouse District, which is mixed use, looking at a bit of retail, bit of residential, bit of commercial, all tied in together.
No timetable yet?
No timetables yet.
Let's turn our attention to hotels and theaters. And the reason I say theater is the Madison Theater sits in between two hotels. What's the status of the Pierre Marquette? The reason I ask is there's a $3 million legal proceeding on the property that the pier and the courtyard, or I should say the courtyard, sits on. Are you concerned about that?
Well, I think that there's just concern, mostly as it relates to what would happen in the worst case scenario. I think that things are going to be resolved down there. There's some of these actions are typical. There's a lot of variables in that project that were not typical for a development like this, with delays in getting both of those properties opened. What impact the lack of revenues had on the project, and so on. So, you know, some of these things will work their way through the system. We're pretty positive that neither one will go dark, and really the best days are ahead now that both of those properties are open and able to start booking some customers.
What about the other big hotel downtown, the Four Points? It was closed. We'll reopen in 3 months, then 6, and now we're over a year.
The owners of the hotel are a hospitality company out of Orlando, Florida. They purchased the hotel several years ago. We have met with them on a couple of occasions to sit down and talk about what their plans are. I have a meeting coming up with them next week where we're going to sit down and talk about their construction plans. They've sent in probably the most comprehensive set of redesign work, plan work that we've seen for any of our hotels downtown. And we're working through that process with them right now. I think that the timetable is one of those questions that we're going to have is how quickly can they get that hotel back and open. It's critical to downtown that we have as many hotel rooms as we can to support the Civic Center and to support the activities, the business activities that we have downtown.
In between those two hotels, the Madison Theater. Negotiations, and I believe we're coming up on the deadline for resolving that and moving forward. What is the status?
Well, it's still wait and see. I mean, the developer has a real good project, and right now we're crunching a lot of numbers with them to see how the project can be potentially financed. I think that everybody is in, for the most part, agreement, and the Comforts are anxious to potentially see a project happen there. Right now, we're really at a point where the developer, they have their financing lined up. They're trying to really work hard with the city manager and his staff to understand, what a potential TIF increment could be down there. What can they realistically expect when it comes to state and federal tax credits and all those kind of things. It's a, redevelopment is a huge issue. I mean, having a green field or a brown field and all you got to do is dig the footings and go makes things a lot simpler. But when you're working with older properties like this, it's much more difficult, takes a little bit more time. But we're excited about the potential for another big project right across the street from the Marriott.
And when the mayor refers to the Comforts, that's the family that owns the Madison property right now. There's a parking lot right next door to it.
Yes.
Its future is?
Well, that's part of the redevelopment plan. What we talked about in working with the owners of the Madison Theater was that since the city owned the parking lot, the surface lot that's next to it, that we would couple the two together, that any new increment that would be generated on the surface parking lot could be used to help to tie or fix the improvements to the Madison Theater. Because the Madison itself it's probably a $12 to $15 million renovation cost just to renovate the theater and to get it up and turned around. So historic tax credits, federal and state historic tax credits are only going to go so far. So you're going to need some additional funds to be able to do that. And that's really what we're doing right now as we work with the developer, is to look at what is the optimum level of development that will generate the most tax increment, and to see if we can't make that work. And that's really the biggest piece that we're trying to get through right now.
Let's turn to transportation issues. I have occasion to drive on Sheridan, University, Western. I'm sorry, Mayor, they're not in good shape. What's the plan?
Well, there is a plan, and the reality is that Peoria was in the same position as many other communities across the state and in the country over the last 5 or 6 years, with the economy being like it is, where we didn't have all the resources we need to maintain our roads, and so like a lot of other people, we pushed back the maintenance schedule on those. The good news on at least University and Sheridan is there is a plan. I mean, University is going to be redone from Nebraska to Forest Hill. And next year, Sheridan Road is going to be redone from McClure down to Richmond, and a new bridge on Richmond. And we're re-looking at our seal coating and some of those things to go back and do maintenance so the roads don't get as bad as they were. Of course, winters like we had last winter don't do us any favors
You got the double hit.
accelerating, the degradation of those roads. It happens, and it's part of the job. There's a much larger conversation that can be had here on infrastructure in our country. And you may have already had that on your show and I missed it, but at every level, local, state, and federal level, elected officials are talking about what they can do to really to bring our infrastructure in line with where we need it to be. And frankly, the infrastructure in our country is in a shambles. Our roads and our bridges and our railroads are all in bad shape. Motor fuel tax hasn't been adjusted in over 30 years. A lot of people that depend on our roads and highways are pushing back on any type of a user fee or acceleration in motor fuel taxes, but that is traditionally how our country has funded our transportation network. And it hasn't been done. We have to address that at some point in time before our infrastructure crumbles.
And along with infrastructure comes sewers and water lines. When you redo Sheridan or other roads like that, do you do that in concert with the water company so that the next year the water company doesn't come out and say, we have a pipe that broke?
We do. Sheridan Road has really been hammered this past year with water main breaks during the course of the year. So as we've been planning for the work that we're going to do on Sheridan, we've been talking with the water company about replacing the water main that goes along in that stretch. We did some of that work in the warehouse district so that we could replace water mains along Washington Street. And it really makes sense. If you're tearing up the streets, if you're going to tear it up, let's get in there and fix the infrastructure that lies underneath it as much as we can. So.
And let's talk non-arterials,
Yes.
neighborhood streets of that
Yes.
nature. The city council just approved more than $600,000 in various types of improvements. They're behind schedule too.
Right. This past year we did an assessment, and we should have the results here in the next month, where we went through and analyzed the condition of all of our city streets in order to give them a grade. And then from that, that will allow us to have a full assessment, probably the first time the city's had a full assessment of every road condition throughout the city ever. I mean, I'm trying to think when the last time we may have done that would have been. But this will allow us to tailor our pavement preservation program so that we can extend the life of many of our streets. We know we're going to have a large list of streets that we're going to have to completely redo. But we also know that if we can stretch out the life of a street, that's going to help us to spend our dollars wisely. So the $600,000 that the council approved is really in 3 different buckets that we can utilize to try and stretch out the type of streets. Because we have asphalt streets, we have concrete streets. It just depends on the nature of the street. You might have a different application for that type
Throw
of
in
street.
a couple of brick streets too.
And some brick streets.
About 4 miles worth, if I
That's
recall
right.
correctly. Almost $300,000 has been approved by the council for bicycle, a master connectivity plan, I believe it's called. Forest Hill, as you referred to, is being redone with bike paths. What are you intending to connect? Is there going to be some sort of a master plan where these bicycles can go to the most used areas?
Yeah, and I think over time, the connectivity piece, you know, it's people really don't understand. Well, okay, you have this one section of Sheridan Road between X Street and Y Street. It's got a bike lane, and then you know it's kind of like the bridge to nowhere. But you know, it's hard to be in a situation where you just snap your fingers and all of a sudden have a bike lane all throughout the city. There's a lot of safety aspects of bike lanes and the appropriate way to put them in. And we've learned a lot from Chicago and some other cities that have pretty aggressive bike plans. So I think that the goal over a number of years is going to be to get to a point where we can actually put the bike lanes in where we can, where they make the most sense, where they actually contribute to the existing bike paths that people are using. And then, you know, in some point, not too far down the road, we'll actually have a city that's connected for not just for cars, but for bicycles, for pedestrians, and for other sorts of people that need to get around.
Let's extend that to rail. You're a proponent of rail service. Right now, the city and IDOT and Amtrak are looking at a bus service to connect to the Amtrak station. The status of that?
Well, the status of that is the bus program is going to start here in about a month. Right. And, you know, the city manager and I have made a number of trips out to Washington, D.C. We've had some really good discussions with the Department of Transportation and with Amtrak and the Federal Highway Administration. And, you know, everybody kind of shakes their head when they say, how come the largest metropolitan area outside of the city of Chicago doesn't have rail service? I mean, it's a darn good question. It's something we've been asking for a long time. There's a lot of people in Peoria that would use rail, passenger rail, to go to Chicago and St. Louis and points beyond. The reality, as we found out a number of years ago when we talked about a direct highway from Peoria to Chicago, is the expense. We'd love to have it. The expense to eventually save 15 or 20 minutes off of a drive to Chicago, the formula doesn't work. It's not going to happen. So what we've really focused on in the last few years is saying, okay, there's high-speed rail basically going to be from Milwaukee to St. Louis and beyond. Obviously, the Chicago to St. Louis corridor is more important to us, and Bloomington's on it. So, you know, we're trying to say, look, if we can get rail service from Peoria over to Bloomington, where we would then have access into the high-speed corridor. That is really probably the best place to start and our best opportunity to get some funding from both state and federal.
So the bus route would be a trial balloon?
Well, what they really want to, we've done a number of studies that show the ridership would be where it needs to be for this to be successful. But there's two things. Number one is the funding's not in place right now to put that service in between Peoria and Bloomington, and they're not completely sold on what our numbers are showing for ridership. So they're encouraging us to, while we're getting things lined up to go for funding for the rail part, start the bus service and get the people that would use that excited about the opportunity of, right now it's a bus, but down the road it's going to be a train. So they want to see those numbers grow.
And those numbers are 27,200 annually?
That's correct.
Real quickly, with regard to transportation, raised intersections.
Mm-hmm.
Wisconsin has one. Maine at University is the most recent. And I don't know if I want to mention this, but the Maine and University intersection actually won an American Society of Civil Engineers award for design. And there's probably some residents who are saying that you're kidding me. But that aside, congratulations on the award to the designers. Are we going to see more of these raised intersections and the other traffic calming devices?
Absolutely. One of the concepts that we've really been trying to embrace is the idea of complete streets. And by complete streets, we mean that a street isn't just there for vehicular traffic. It's there for bicyclists. It's there for pedestrians. And the raised intersection does two things. It provides traffic calming by slowing vehicles down as they drive through the intersection. But it's also more pedestrian friendly because it allows for, if a mother has a stroller or somebody that's in a wheelchair, they're not going down off the curb of the sidewalk onto the street and then coming back up on the other side. It's a raised intersection that allows for the easy movement of pedestrians that have mobility issues.
Let's stay at the intersection, but for a different reason. CSO, Combined Sewer Overflow, I believe it stands for. The EPA is coming down on cities nationwide saying you can't have combined sewers. The little structures that are around that intersection at Maine and University take overflow water. Part of the argument the city is making to the EPA to say, take it easy on us?
It's part of the argument that the EPA is making themselves. The EPA just recently released guidance to communities that have CSO issues like Peoria that said that there are ways that you can use green infrastructure to capture the water and infiltrate it back into the soils. And we're using that same guidance as we look at our issues that we're facing in Peoria. Our combined sewer area is about 8.5 square miles and encompasses largely the older neighborhoods of the city. But it's also the area where we have very permeable soils, and sandy soils, so it can take a lot of water and it can absorb a lot of water. So what you see at Maine and University, where you see rain gardens that are set up to take that stormwater overflow, capture it and infiltrate it back into the ground, is what we're looking to do throughout that combined sewer area.
Two things real quick on that, H. Number one is just on the intersection and the work that we've done at Maine and University. We have never in modern Peoria history ever had as much community dialogue as we had about what that intersection was going to look like, what we wanted to accomplish. That wasn't a few city engineers and the city council sitting in a room and saying, let's do this. We had an unbelievable amount of community input on that, led by Councilman Graham, who really did a good job of bringing all the stakeholders in. It's a huge change for what we're used to. And anytime you have change like that, some people are going to push back. By and large, and we all get, the manager and I and the council members get a lot of emails on calls on this. The community up there, the business community, the residential community, the Bradley community is very excited about this. We have to give this new transportation area of our city that's so important time to work, and we think it will. We don't think we're going to have drastic changes to it, maybe a couple minor tweaks, but we're really comfortable with what happened. The second part of this on the CSO is the solutions that a lot of cities have used over a number of years, all of which are very expensive, amount to basic engineering solutions where you put, big pipes underground to move the water. And what we're trying to convince the EPA to allow us to do with the solutions that we want to do, it's going to accomplish the same thing, but it's also going to beautify the city at the same time. We haven't come to a final agreement with them. We're slowly getting closer to a point where they're going to be more comfortable with the green solutions, if you will, that we're offering. But it's going to offer Peoria to have an opportunity to accomplish what they want us to accomplish in terms of the overflow into the sanitary system. But it's also going to beautify our city at the same time and put Peoria on the map as the first city that has remediated the CSO problem with a green solution. The first one in the country. It's exciting.
Let's go through a couple of issues real quickly so
Sure.
we make sure that we get at least a touch on them. The water franchise agreement. Currently 5 years between the city and you can review the franchise agreement every 5 years.
We have a proposed draft that we've shared with the water company. We're waiting to hear back from them, and we'll be back at the table with them hopefully very soon.
And how about video gambling cafes? There's a moratorium in place?
There's not, but at the next council meeting next week, that is the agenda item to put a moratorium in place just to allow us to have more time to consider what direction we want to go with that.
And the biggest hangup is lack of food sales? Or?
Well, the biggest hang-up is some of the newer operations that are coming in are basically just putting in some tables and chairs and a microwave oven and having gambling machines. And I think that the majority of the council and I agree that there should probably be more of an investment in the business than a microwave oven and 4 or 5 gambling machines.
Let's talk about investment in business. The city has been characterized as difficult to do business with when it comes to businesses putting money into improvements or bringing new business in. When you do improvements, that means that you have to get your money back through rent. And then there may be a person across the street who is grandfathered in and isn't putting a lot of money in. So you want the warehouse district in particular to be a complete entity. If there are people who aren't putting money in, and then the guy across the street or down the block is, and then his rent goes up, that causes a concern for you?
It does, but it's also a situation in which we created the TIF district just for that reason. We know it's expensive to rehabilitate older buildings, to take an old warehouse and turn it into a residential property, or to take even a smaller building and to create a restaurant with an office use above it. But when you take buildings offline and then you have to put them back in place, if we can provide TIF incentives for code compliance, that's what we can do. And I think that when you take public funds to help to do a project like that, you have to understand that means that you have to bring your buildings into compliance with the state fire code, which has to be there anyways, the Illinois Accessibility Code, which has to be there anyways. And our building codes, we've adopted the International Existing Building Code, which is flexible, more flexible for existing buildings, and just behind the whole idea of an older building and a rehab of an older building. But there's costs with rehabbing older buildings, and that's the intent behind the TIF, is to help to provide that incentive to those individuals to bring in buildings into code compliance.
Let's turn to medical cannabis. The city has very limited input into how that operates. Any interest in setting up a dispensary in the city?
Yeah, we've had interest in both the cultivation side and the dispensary side. As you said, it's a lot harder in the urban areas just because of the distance requirements that need to be maintained between schools and some other uses. The medical marijuana issue is not one that they gave cities any leeway on deciding whether a community wanted to have it or not. Our home rule powers mean nothing. It's legal in the state of Illinois as long as you conform to existing zoning. So I supported the decision for medical marijuana. I think it was the right decision. In Peoria, it's just going to be a matter of finding if there's a location in Peoria that works when they're looking at other more rural areas of the state that they can put basically a Morton building up and secure it.
The status, you're in charge of hiring the police chief.
Yes.
What's the status?
We're working with a search firm to get the position out. We've got a great interim police chief in Chief Jerry Mitchell, and we're very pleased with the efforts and activities that he's been doing.
And real briefly, Mayor, legal proceedings, I understand you're going to be limited in what you can say, but in retrospect, might you have handled the situation with the Twitter account differently?
Well, I am very limited, and the attorneys have said don't say anything about it, and I will abide by that. But I think probably the best way to say it is when people understand the full story and the chronology of how it happened, there really wasn't a different direction.
Okay, and with that, we are out of time. Thank you for joining us on the first of the new season for At Issue. To City Manager Patrick Urick, thank you.
Thank you.
And to Mayor Jim Ardis, I appreciate both of you being here as always.
Thanks, H.
And next week, we'll be back with another edition of At Issue, this time talking about farm conservation. Before you say farms, I'm not interested in farms. It affects your drinking water. We'll talk about that next time on At Issue.